Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Orlando Who, a history of local defunct sports teams. I'm Travis Peterbaugh. I'm the curator of collections here at the History Center. I'd like to welcome everyone joining us here in person and also everyone joining us in the live webinar. I'll make sure to leave some time at the end for questions, and for those of you joining us online, feel free to leave any questions in the chat and Cheyenne can relay those to me. So, this program is about defunct sports teams in Orlando, and hopefully there's some people here that remember them, and if not, you'll learn some new things today. Now, there's more than enough to go around, so while I'll be talking about many of them, by my count, we would at least need 2 of these programs to do justice to all the collection of sports teams that have come and gone in this area over the last 100 years. The time I spend talking about these teams will in no way be comprehensive, but I wish to give you an overview of the team's history and share some memorable anecdotes along the way. Lunch and Learn programs could easily be built around some of these teams and their fascinating histories. But for today, I'll get to as many as I can in this hour. 2 teams I won't be covering are the Orlando Solar Bears and the Orlando Predators, who at one time were both defunct, but now they're perfectly funked once again. So the question many of you may be asking is, why has Orlando been the graveyard of so many franchises across so many sports teams? Are the teams that call Orlando home snake-bitten, or is there something more that connects them? Some of the teams we'll look at today existed across decades, others lasted for a few years, and some lasted for 2 years or less. There's been a little bit of everything over the years. Some teams deserve their fate, and others may have never had a fair chance to succeed. Ask 10 people why sports teams here come and go, and you'll likely get 10 different responses. What I can tell you are some interesting stories about the teams you might remember, and some that you might hear and say, the Orlando Who? The Rebels. Would it surprise you to know that the most successful sports team to ever come out of Orlando wasn't a baseball team, wasn't a basketball team, and it wasn't a football team? It was a women's fast-pitch softball team called the Rebels. They brought great pride to Orlando during a 4-decade run of excellence. Orlando Seals, cool. The Rebels played at C.L. Varner Stadium in the neighborhood of Callahan, which is located near the site of the Bob Carr Theater. The Rebels were founded in 1954 as members of the Florida Women's Softball League, which consisted of teams in St. Pete, Tampa, Gainesville, and Jacksonville. The Rebels were made up of players who had previously competed locally as the White Turkey Girls. Some recognition there. The team changed their name to the Rebels because they would no longer be sponsored by the White Turkey restaurant, which maybe some of you remember was out near where the Science Center is today. No? It's a drive-in, popular drive-in. As team manager Marge Ricker once explained, the name evoked the rebel spirit of going their own way without relying on an official sponsor. From the beginning to the end of the team's run in the 1980s, the Rebels were led and defined by one person, Marge Ricker. She served as the team's manager for their entire history, but she wasn't just the manager of the team. She was their promoter, travel coordinator, groundskeeper, and chief fundraiser. By day, Ricker taught math at the same school she once attended, Cherokee Junior High School. In fact, most of the Rebels consisted of teachers, with assorted office workers and even some high school students. But the one thing they all had in common, none of them were paid. The Rebels were a strictly amateur group playing for the love of the game. The only way the team itself made any money was from program sales, gate receipts, donations from friends, and fundraising initiatives, such as car washes, bake sales, and in 1979, they cleaned Orlando Stadium until 8 in the morning after a Ted Nugent concert for $1,000. All of this went towards sustaining a travel budget the team needed in order to compete against top-flight teams scattered around the country due to the lack of quality available talent in Florida. For a time, the team regularly outdrew the Orlando Twins, often playing to 1,000 fans and standing room-only crowds at Varner Stadium. Still, the team was constantly broke, and they struggled to meet expenses. Ricker paid for many team and stadium-related costs out of her own pocket over the years. But the team never could have survived or had the sustained success without being an excellent team on the field. The Rebels were a perennial winner. Regional championships became a given by the 1960s, as did appearances in national championships. But there was a juggernaut team from Connecticut called the Rebestos Breakettes, and they're widely regarded as the greatest women's sports team of all time, that the Rebels just couldn't get past. But in 1981, they met at the national championships in Houston. The Breakettes were well-funded, and they flew to Houston, and they had meal allowances to cover their trip. The Rebels arrived in a bus driven by Ricker and prepared their meals on hot plates in their motel rooms. They were a true underdog. But this time, finally, the underdog Rebels beat the mighty Breakettes 2-1 to win their first ever national championship. Sadly, the Rebels dissolved in 1985. Varner Stadium was condemned and demolished, and Ricker passed away 10 years ago at the age of 88. But the indelible mark she left on sports in Central Florida, along with the Rebels, won't be forgotten. Twins. For generations of area baseball fans, the Washington Senators and Minnesota Twins were synonymous with Orlando. Starting in 1936, when the Senators made their home in Orlando for spring training, the franchise that in 1961 would become the Minnesota Twins would have one of the longest continual relationships with any city in all of Florida. In 1963, the team established a Class A minor league club for the Florida State League, and the Orlando Twins were born. The Twins played in the Florida State League from 1963 to 1972, winning the league title in 1968 over the Miami Marlins, the original Miami Marlins. Then in 1973, the Minnesota Twins announced that the Charlotte Hornets of the AA Southern League would move to Orlando and play under the Orlando Twins name. The Twins achieved their greatest success in 1981 when they captured the Southern League Championship 3-1 over the Nashville Sounds. Those Twins hit a league record 167 home runs that season and were led by several players who would go on to have important roles in the future success of the parent club in Minnesota. But in minor league baseball, there are few constants, as managers, players, affiliations, and even league designations often change. But there was one person with the Twins who became recognized as Mr. Orlando, not just for his involvement with the Twins, but for his presence on the city's sports scene. His name was Bob Willis. Since his first day in 1964, Willis served as the team's general manager, president, and the local face of the franchise. One of his most lasting contributions came on a night in Tampa in 1965 when he helped save the career of a future Hall of Famer. At the time, a highly touted second base prospect who was hitting .320, but frustrated at not getting along well with his teammates. Rod Carew, a name you may have heard, stormed off the field in the middle of a game, ready to quit the sport for good. Carew was the only black player on the Twins at the time, and he felt singled out by teammates who he felt didn't give him a fair chance. Willis saw what happened, and he intercepted Carew in the locker room, telling him that the only opinions that he needed to worry about were his and those of his team's manager, Harry Warner. Carew later said that he would otherwise have ended up back in New York City, working in a menial job and riding the subway, if not for Willis. Carew went on to earn induction into the Major League Hall of Fame with over 3,000 career hits and 18 All-Star appearances to his credit. Willis was involved in other sports as well, including football teams we'll talk about later, such as the Panthers, Blazers, and Americans, in addition to starting the Florida Citrus Bowl basketball tournament and serving as the director of the College Bowl game. But in 1988, the era of Bob Willis came to an end when he retired from the Twins after 25 years. This also marked the beginning of the end of the Twins in Orlando. 1 year later, after negotiations for improvements of Tinker Field stalled with the city of Orlando, the Twins made a deal to relocate their spring home to Fort Myers, Florida, starting in 1991. This proved to be a sign of more to come, as the Twins were sold to a local developer, William DuPont III, who was the original owner of the Orlando Magic. He immediately rebranded the Twins as the Sunrays in 1990 and the team would remain an affiliate of the Twins through the 1992 season. In their last season as the Orlando Twins in 1989, the team ended an 8-year playoff drought led by future major leaguer Paul Sorrento's 27 home runs and 112 runs batted in. That's the guy in color. Though they fell short in the playoffs to Greenville, it was a successful ending to the Twins era of baseball in Orlando. All right, Panthers. Panthers were a professional football team that played in the Continental Football League. The CFL operated from 1965 to 1969 and was considered minor league football, not anywhere on par with the National Football League or even the American Football League. Orlando's entry joined the league in 1966, adopting the Panthers nickname. The team played their home games at the Tangerine Bowl and were an immediate success on the field, advancing to 3 straight league championship games from 1966 to 1968, winning the titles in 67 and 68. The Panthers and the CFL briefly flirted with the unlikeliest of players in 1969. Following his Heisman Trophy winning campaign in 1968, USC running back O.J. Simpson became the most coveted football player in America. With the first pick of the draft, the Buffalo Bills were expected to take Simpson, but only if they could meet his elaborate contract demands. His agent contacted CFL Commissioner Jim Dunn to explore whether the league had the interest or the ability to sign Simpson. This would have been a huge coup for the league, and they were prepared to offer him $400,000 a year to play, which in 1969 was a lot of money. Panthers owner Elmer Cook contacted a friend at the Florida Citrus Commission to see if they could raise money to bring OJ to Orlando. But they did not have the money in their budget after recently picking up an option on their spokesperson's contract, who happened to be Anita Bryant. OJ ended up going to Buffalo, after all, and the rest is history. Playing in the Atlantic Coast Football League in 1970, the Panthers made history of their own when Pat Palinkas, a school teacher from Tampa, became the first woman to play professional football. Her husband, Steve, tried out for the team as a place kicker and asked that he be able to bring his wife, Pat, to be his holder. To Steve's surprise, Coach Paul Macy signed the 27-year-old, 122-pound Pat. In August of 1970, she made history when she held for Steve on a point-after touchdown attempt against the Bridgeport Jets. This attempt ended in disaster when she bobbled the snap, getting drilled in the process by linebacker Wally Florence, who admitted afterwards he wanted to try and hurt her for making folly of a man's game. She rebounded, however, and held successfully on 2 more attempts in the game, and the Panthers won the preseason game 26-7. It was a short-lived career, however, as Steve was cut just 2 games later, and Pat was suspended from the team for missing too many practices due to her numerous appearances on television shows around the country. This would be the last season of Panther football, as the team finished with its only losing record, and they would be sued by the league for unpaid dues, ceasing operations before the 1971 season. Yeah. The Blazers. The Blazers, in retrospect, were doomed from the very beginning. Not on the field necessarily, where the team finished with a 16-7 overall record and nearly won the league's first and only championship game. No, the Blazers were doomed by critical mistakes in management and by the hand they were dealt by the World Football League, an offshoot league designed to compete directly with the National Football League. They wanted to spend previously unheard of amounts of money on player contracts. This was also the same league that contemplated having players wear different color pants based on their position. But depending on who you ask, the Blazers failed either because they were underfunded, not supported by the business community and local government, the Tangerine Bowl undergoing an expansion, or that they were rushed into the season without time to adequately prepare. On May 18, 1974, this team became a reality. After nearly 2 weeks of negotiations with the WFL, team executive Rami Loud completed a deal to relocate the Virginia Ambassadors to Orlando in time for the 1974 season. Loud had headed a group of investors hoping to land an NFL franchise for Orlando under the name the Florida Suns. When that effort failed, his group turned their attentions towards the WFL. 3 days after the announcement, the team changed their name to the Florida Blazers. This was due in part because there was already a team in Anaheim named the Southern California Sun. Incidentally, Loud chose the name Florida instead of Orlando because he wanted the team to be considered a regional asset rather than just being identified with the city. So things were just fine on the field for the Blazers. The team won 6 of their first 7 games, more or less cruising to a comfortable 14-7 regular season record. Of their 6 losses, 5 were by a combined total of 15 points. So they're a pretty good team. The Blazers rolled through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs to earn a berth in the league's inaugural World Bowl I against the Birmingham Americans. But along the way, things weren't always so great for the Blazers. For example, paychecks stopped coming altogether 9 weeks into the season, and despite the on-field product, the team struggled to draw crowds, prompting speculation that the Blazers could even play their final 2 games of the season in Tampa. It came out as well that Loud had tried to negotiate a sale that would result in the team relocating to Atlanta. Prior to an October game at Memphis, the Blazers players threatened not to play unless they were paid. The Blazers were paid by the league and lost the game by 10 points, which was their worst defeat of the season. Fast forward to the World Bowl, the Blazers trailed 22-0 entering the 4th quarter, but staged a stirring rally that ultimately fell short by 1 point. Ask any diehard Blazer fan to this day, and they will tell you Tommy Riemann fumbled after he crossed the goal line. The referees ruled that he fumbled before entering the end zone, a swing which would have given Florida a first-quarter touchdown and perhaps the deciding margin of victory. Nevertheless, the Blazers lost the final game they ever played representing Florida. Just days after the game, the league stripped the franchise from Loud, awarding it to a hotelier from Orlando named David Williams. It only got worse for Loud, though, as he was arrested on December 21st on a charge of embezzling state tax money from the team's ticket sales. By January, Loud and the Blazers had been named in 15 state and federal lawsuits. Then in March, Loud was arrested on conspiracy and cocaine distribution, for which he would serve 3 years in jail. As for the Blazers, the team ceased operations and the contracts of its players were purchased by the San Antonio Wings. And the WFL, the league folded midway through its 2nd season in 1975. Anyone go to a Blazers game? No. All right, the Americans. In 1981, the Americans played for 1 season in the American Football Association, which operated from 1977 to 1983. The AFL followed the World Football League and preceded the United States Football League, just so we keep everything straight. It wasn't quite semi-pro, but it was strictly minor league. But the AFA fortunately had no aspirations to challenge the NFL. In a league where players were paid 1% of gate receipts, sometimes working out to $200 or less per player, there were no hopes for higher aspirations. Incidentally, players were not paid for road games. The Americans struggled to gain traction locally, in large part to a burned-out business community that had gotten accustomed to bounce checks from both the Panthers and Blazers. In this troubled league, 3 of the 10 franchises would fold before the conclusion of the 1981 season. But the Americans joined the league as an expansion franchise, and they held a public tryout in March of 1981 looking for players. Over 300 potential players showed up, including a bank officer, a drug counselor, a space engineer, a probation officer, an insurance adjuster, an aircraft mechanic, and a building contractor. Most of these players maintained their day jobs even during the season. But the ranks even included someone who had played on the University of Massachusetts freshman football team 14 years earlier in 1967. This collection of flotsam and jetsam inevitably led to the defining incident of the 1981 season for the Americans. So the Americans earned recognition not for their play on the field. They stumbled to an overall record of 3-7, but because of a particular story that made national news. This is a good one. In June of 1981, the Orlando Sentinel discovered that an American's offensive lineman named Robert Lee Randy Johnson had impersonated a former University of Georgia lineman and 3-year NFL veteran named Robert Randy Johnson to boost his chances of making the team. He made the team, but the injury-plagued player drew plenty of suspicion along the way. When he joined the team, he weighed 280 pounds. Now, in the days before massive 300-pound linemen became the norm in football, this raised eyebrows among coaches, with one saying, nobody could go that far downhill that fast. Head coach Bob Williams even contacted the University of Georgia requesting a photo of Johnson, and he received a copy that showed the real Randy Johnson accepting an award with 2 other teammates, but the photo proved inconclusive. And for someone with supposed NFL experience, the quality of his play failed to impress his coaches, and along with constantly being injured, was the primary reason he was not a starter. Sentinel columnist Larry Guest put the pieces together, which led to the revelation that Johnson was not who he claimed to be. Not only was he not NFL veteran Randy Johnson, but he had never even played college football. Shortly after this revelation, Johnson was cut from the team. So the Americans finished their lone eventful season with a 3-7 record. They won their final game at home, 32-3 over the Texas Wranglers, but in front of only 1,500 fans. Like the fans, even the Orlando Sentinel had stopped pretending to care, devoting only 5 lines to summarizing their final game of the season. So Johnson also had taken the real Johnson's Social Security number and was trying to get jobs around Orlando. But the real Johnson was very forgiving, and all was well. All right, the Renegades. Just 4 years after the Orlando Americans folded up shop, Orlando was ready to give professional football another try. This time, courtesy of Disney. No, not that Disney. Orlando businessman Don Disney with a Z. The United States Football League, or USFL, was looking for a new home for one of its wayward franchises, the Washington Federals. Talks of relocating the Federals to Miami broke down when the league announced it intended to move from spring to fall in 1986. The potential Miami-based ownership group, headed by Sherwood Weiser, wisely did not want to go to head against either the Dolphins or Miami Hurricanes, who both dominated Miami sports at the time. With USFL teams already in Tampa and Jacksonville, this left the vacant market of Orlando. In August of '84, Disney announced that he had purchased the Federals for $5 million and would be moving the team to Orlando in time for the 1985 season. As part of the deal, Disney had secured the head coaching and general manager services of Howard Schnellenberger, who in 1983 led the University of Miami to a national title, rebuilding a program which had been in shambles upon his arrival. Schnellenberger would give instant credibility and hope to Orlando's newest franchise, which had gone 4-14 in 1983 and 3-15 in 1984. A 3-year, $5 million deal couldn't hurt either for the former Hurricanes coach. And for a coach at the time, that was a lot of money. On September 10th, however, the deal fell apart. All of it. John Bassett, owner of the Tampa Bay Bandits, refused to budge from their terms for the transfer of territorial rights, which they held over Orlando, in order to make the move work. Schnellenberger was turned off by the seeming lack of stability in the league, and he withdrew his commitment to join the team. The Bandits' block had been a play perhaps in anticipation of moving their own franchise to Orlando in 1986, rather than going head-to-head against the Buccaneers in Tampa. Within weeks, though, terms were revised and Disney was able to move forward with his purchase of the Federals. Without Schnellenberger, however, he would need to find a new head coach and a new name. After a name-the-team contest, the Federals became the Orlando Renegades. Other names submitted to the league for approval included the Lasers with a Z, Condors, and Lynx. As for a head coach, the Renegades found a bargain compared to Schnellenberger in a person familiar to anyone who has ever watched ESPN College Game Day, Lee Corso. Corso was an experienced college football head coach, and he was hired away from his job mid-season as head coach of Northern Illinois to take over for the Renegades. His contract, 3 years for $150,000 a season, was far more favorable to the team than what Schnellenberger would have received. Things were looking up for the Renegades, and yet the 1985 season proved to be only slightly better than the product in Washington. The Renegades opened with 6 straight losses, and although they began to show signs of improvement along the way, the Renegades averaged slightly over 25,000 fans per game, which was a respectable figure for the team, and they finished the 18-game season with a 5-13 record. The high point coming in Week 15 when they humiliated the Tampa Bay Bandits, the franchise that once tried to block their very existence, in a 37-7 rout at Orlando Stadium. I will say I was a kid and a Bandits fan at the time, and that made me very upset. I did not like the Renegades. But sadly, the Renegades would not have had a chance to build on their first season in Orlando. The Renegades were one of 8 teams selected by the USFL to be part of the move to fall of '86, but the league collapsed before the transition could ever take place. The Lions. Today, the Orlando City Soccer Club is part of the fabric of Orlando's sporting community, boasting a following as rabid as that of the city's NBA team, the Magic. Orlando's road to Major League Soccer started in 1985 thanks to the vision of a former Rollins College coach named Mark Dillon. Dillon played college soccer at the University of San Francisco, winning an NCAA national championship in 1975, followed by a brief playing career in the North American Soccer League for both Seattle and San Jose. He followed that with a short coaching stint in England, and then in 1983 he took the reins as the head coach of the soccer team at Rollins, lasting just 1 season, but he stayed in the area and began playing pickup soccer on the weekends in Winter Park with other former college players. Dillon joined forces with Steve Nash, who ran a local soccer publication called Soccer World, to form Football Club Orlando Lions, consisting of local talent from high school, collegiate, and ex-collegiate levels. Then, after just 6 weeks of practicing together, the Lions scheduled a soccer exhibition against the Tampa Bay Rowdies, a former team in the NASL until the league folded in 1984. The Rowdies still competed as an independent team, and in Florida soccer were still considered a major brand. In front of a crowd of 4,200 fans at Lake Brantley High School Stadium, the Rowdies defeated the Lions 1-0 on February 22, 1986. Orlando controlled the play for most of the game, though failed to take advantage of their scoring chances. Still, the team left a positive impression on the Rowdies, who asked that the Lions be part of their summer series. The game was the first step in eventually bringing professional soccer to Orlando. 2 years later, in 1988, the Lions made their debut in their inaugural season of the 10-team American Soccer League, which would only last for 2 seasons before folding. Unfortunately for Mark Dillon, his vision of seeing the Lions turn professional would not even last that long. He resigned as president and general manager of the club just 3 months into the Lions' first season, initially citing health reasons, but days later revealed that it had to do with philosophical differences with the team's owners, Soccer Services, Inc., a Tallahassee-based corporation that owed 90% of the Lions. Dillon said that had he not resigned, he certainly would have been fired. The owners, as Dillon claimed, used the Lions as a promotional vehicle for its education program and youth camps, rather than wanting to field a quality team. The Lions failed, along with the league, and after 1 more season in the American Professional Soccer League, merged with the Fort Lauderdale Strikers in 1990. Dillon never went away, however, and brought back the Lions name in 1992 with an entry in the U.S. ISL. In 1993, the Lions won the league championship, and Dillon was named head coach of the year. Immediately after, though, again, Dillon departed, and the Lions persisted in the U.S. ISL as an indoor-outdoor franchise until 1996. He gave professional soccer one more go in 1997, attempting to rebrand the Lions as the Sundogs of the U.S. ISL A-League. This was a step down from Major League Soccer, and they nearly folded before the end of their sole season in Orlando. The Orlando Lions of Mark Dillon were officially finished. The nickname resurfaced, however, when the Austin Aztecs FC of the United Soccer League relocated to Orlando in 2010. The newly formed Orlando City Soccer Club would be nicknamed the Lions in a nod to the original team, and ownership stated an interest in joining Major League Soccer within 3 to 5 years. This happened in 2015 when the Orlando City Soccer Club, the Lions, became the 21st franchise in MLS. It took 30 years, but Orlando soccer finally reached the big time. All right, the juice. In January 1989, a 33-year-old real estate executive from Colorado was on vacation in Australia when he had an idea for a new league. Jim Morley, who was a former minor leaguer with the San Francisco Giants, read an article about a senior golf tournament, and he wondered why there wasn't an equivalent for baseball players. He immediately went to work on making that vision a reality. Upon his return from Australia, he sent letters to 1,200 former Major League Baseball players to gauge their interest. Within a few weeks, he had received over 700 replies, and he knew that he was onto something. His idea became the Senior Professional Baseball Association, and it debuted a short 10 months later in the fall of 1989. The league featured players 35 and older, with an exception made for catchers, whose age requirement was only 32 because, well, they all have terrible knees. But it did not require that players had actually ever played in the major leagues. Some of the teams offered open tryouts, so if you thought you could play and met the age requirement, you could try out. And for some people, this actually worked. But the league was filled with familiar names to baseball fans, such as Bill Spaceman Lee, the Mad Hungarian Al Hrabosky, Fergie Jenkins, Dave Kingman, Raleigh Fingers, Greg Nettles, Bobby Bonds, George Foster, and Vida Blue. There were Pelicans, Explorers, Legends, Tropics, Super Sox, Sun Sox, Suns, and Juice. The 8-team league featured franchises in St. Pete, Bradenton, Fort Myers, Port St. Lucie, West Palm Beach, a shared situation in Pompano Beach in Miami, and locally, Winter Haven and Orlando. Morley sold the franchises for $850,000 each and kept St. Petersburg's for himself. One of the league's owners famously said, "If it works, we're all visionaries. If not, we're fools." I shouldn't have to tell you how this all turned out, but since we're here. 2 months into the season, and despite fielding a competitive team, the Juice had the worst attendance in the league, averaging 380 fans per game. Yes, 380. The team gave away thousands of tickets for a December game against the Suns, and only 484 fans showed up. Owners figured on needing to fill 1,800 to 2,000 seats per game in order to break even, which was really a lofty and unrealistic goal. A majority of the teams in the league were headed for six-figure losses. Juice owner Phil Breen, as you can see there, he wanted to commit to Orlando for at least 3 to 5 years before deciding whether or not the league would be a success locally. Unfortunately for Breen, time was running out for him. By January 1990, the FBI and IRS were both on Breen's trail. Although he owned the Juice, Breen lived in Beverly Hills, Michigan, and only made one visit to the team's offices in Orlando all season. On January 9, 1990, Breen was sued by the chairman of Group 1 Mortgage Corp. In Southfield, Michigan, for siphoning more than $10 million from Group 1 into 2 dummy corporations under the pretense of reselling home loans. Breen had been serving as the president of Group 1 at the time. His wife reporting him missing to the police shortly after this story came out. A few weeks later, the league took control of the Juice when the team was unable to meet payroll. Even if the league returned for a second season, the chances of the Juice remaining in Orlando were slim to none. Pat Williams called the presence of the Juice harmful to the long-term prospects of landing a major league team, and he suggested publicly that they find another home. It hardly mattered, as the Juice ceased operations after one season, and the league folded halfway into its second season, never to return. Speaking of never returning, no one ever saw or heard from Breen again. Wanted by the FBI, he is purported to have disappeared to the Bahamas, and his story became the subject of a segment on NBC's Unsolved Mysteries. According to his daughter, Breen was declared legally deceased in 1997. I went to that game. That ticket stub was from Winter Haven, and we had season tickets because we supported local Polk County teams, and it's the only time I ever got a foul ball at a game, but that's because there was nobody there to get a ball. I was on the third base side. The foul ball was hit down the right field line, and I had time to go get it. All right, the Sunrays. In 1990, the brief era of Sunrays baseball began. Now, it seems relevant to talk about with the recent attention on Pat Williams and his quixotic effort to bring Major League Baseball to Orlando. This happened over 30 years ago, too, with Williams at the helm. When William DuPont purchased the Orlando Twins, he put his president of the Orlando Magic, Pat Williams, in charge of the team. With the change of brand from Twins to Sunrays, DuPont transparently hoped that one day the name would transfer over to a new Major League franchise in Orlando in the next round of National League expansion. As GM of the Sunrays, Williams promised fans a different experience, one that he called Mardi Gras and the 4th of July all rolled into one. His theatrics caused one former team executive to derisively compare him to Harold Hill from The Music Man. In September of 1990, Williams went so far as to name Kansas City Royals catcher Bob Boone the first manager of the Orlando Sunrays, a non-existent Major League Baseball team. History recalls that expansion franchises were awarded in 1991 to Denver and Miami, not Orlando. But beyond the new name, much stayed the same at Tinker Field. The team continued to struggle at the gate, finishing 8th in attendance out of 10 teams in the Southern League. But it built on a successful 1989 season, making it all the way to the League Championship Series against the Memphis Chicks, losing in 5 games. The Sunrays followed up their success in 1991 with another trip to the League Championship Series, but this time they closed it out with a series win over the Birmingham Barons in 4 games, delivering Orlando its first championship since 1981. It's little wonder the team experienced so much sustained success from 89 to 91. Still a farm team for the Minnesota Twins, the Double-A team was stocked with talent that would eventually contribute to the Twins winning the World Series for the second time in 5 seasons in 1991. Off the field, William DuPont was hit hard by the economic recession of the early 1990s and was forced to sell the team to Rich DeVos, who purchased the Orlando Magic for $85 million in 1991, after being part of the failed effort to bring Major League Baseball to Orlando. The Sunrays were included in this deal. The 1992 season, while not quite as successful on the field, the team finished 60-82 and once again struggled drawing fans, still featured one of the more unique storylines in baseball. Shireen Sammons, who started with the Orlando Twins as an unpaid intern in 1988, moved her way all the way up to Director of Administration, and then in 1992 became the Vice President and General Manager of the team. The 28-year-old became one of only 3 female general managers in all of baseball. In the role, she wore many hats for the Sunrays, such as representing the club at league meetings, coordinating the day-to-day activities at Tinker Field, selling tickets, and arranging travel details for the team on road trips. It wasn't always easy for Shireen, however, as many of the players resented having a female boss. In an ugly incident at a team party that went beyond usual snide comments, a player spit tobacco juice on her back. The next day, he was released. After not even a full year of ownership, DeVos announced that summer he struck a deal to sell the Sunrays to the Tribune Company, owners of the Chicago Cubs, for $3.1 million. This signaled the official end of the Minnesota Twins era in Orlando, as the team would now be stocked with prospects belonging to the Cubs. It also marked the end of the brief Sunrays era, as the Cubs chose to field their new team as the Orlando Cubs. Just as the Charlotte Hornets became the Orlando Twins in 1973, the Charlotte Knights would become the Orlando Cubs in 1993. Thunder. This time it would be different. Instead of competing against it, the World League of American Football would be a spring league funded by the NFL itself. Announced a full year ahead of its launch, the World League announced that it would be an international football league comprised of teams from Europe and North America, based in London, Frankfurt, Barcelona, Montreal, with 6 teams located inside the United States. The idea of planting a flag in Europe had first been conceived in the 1970s, when NFL owners wanted to establish a new developmental league called the International Football League on the continent of Europe. It's an idea that was far ahead of its time. The league decided to revisit this concept in the early 1990s, certain this time both Europe was ready for the game and that spring football could succeed. What could possibly go wrong? On March 15, 1990, Orlando became the first city to officially join the 10-team World League. Don Disney, as you recall, who originally owned the Orlando Renegades, expressed interest in again owning a team, but a swimsuit manufacturer and real estate developer from California named Raj Bathal became the team's owner after, he says, having his pick of all the franchises in the league. The Thunder, as the team came to be called, stood out from the beginning, in no small part to their uniforms, which featured a fluorescent lime green color scheme. First of any kind in sports. The team would need to find a way to stand out off the field as well if it wanted to avoid the fate of other failed Orlando football endeavors. With only a few weeks to prepare for the season, the Thunder opened with a thrilling 35-34 win over San Antonio on March 25, 1991 at the Citrus Bowl. A 58-20 win the following week had local fans all in on the Thunder, but a 6-game losing streak followed in which the team failed to top 14 points in any of the contests. At 2-5, the Thunder rallied to win the final 3 games of the season to finish 5-5 and incredibly just missed the playoffs, tying for the division lead with New Jersey at 5-5, but losing the head-to-head tiebreaker. While the on-field product looked up, behind the scenes the Thunder were in turmoil. Rumors of cost-cutting, employees being dismissed, and berated for expenses such as paper plates. Minority owners reached out to the league to express disenchantment with the ownership situation, and problems festered. The bad feelings lingered into the following season, with reports throughout centered around ownership changes, mounting financial losses, and smaller crowds, despite actually having a better team. Things were so troublesome attendance-wise that the league considered taking away a home playoff game from the Thunder, despite a league-best 8-2 record. To stave off this embarrassment, the city of Orlando purchased 1,000 tickets with $10,000 allocated from confiscated drug money. The team advanced all the way to the World Bowl in Montreal against the Sacramento Surge. The skinflint ownership, however, caused a stir by forcing the team's cheerleaders to pay their own way to Montreal, resulting in 19 of the group's 28 members staying home in a game the Thunder would eventually lose 21-17 to Sacramento. In September, the World League announced that it would suspend operations for a year in order to restructure. Despite succeeding in increasing the popularity of the sport in Europe, the league failed to find financial support or success in the United States. The league resurfaced several years later as NFL Europe, but after 2 seasons, the Orlando Thunder would be no more. It would be nearly a decade before Orlando would get another shot at spring football, with the Rage in the first iteration of the XFL. right, roller gators and jackals. In 1995, ice hockey's version of arena football came to Orlando. It was a faster, more offensive-oriented version of the sport. Instead of being played on ice skates, it was played on inline skates or rollerblades. You remember rollerblades, right? If you lived through the 90s, maybe you even owned a pair. Or if you were like me, you skated around the French Quarter on weekends on your rollerblades. They were a thing. In 1993, the Roller Hockey International League was formed by Larry King, not CNN's Larry King, but one-time husband of Billie Jean King, Larry King, to start capitalizing on this fad. Aside from being played on sport court instead of ice, roller hockey differed fundamentally from ice hockey in a few ways. Not including goaltenders, teams played 4-on-4 as opposed to 5-on-5. Blue lines were eliminated to open up the game for longer passes, resulting in wide-open offense. Games were played in 4 12-minute quarters, and the games featured 16 goals on average as opposed to 7 in the NHL. The Orlando Roller Gators were born when the Edmonton Sled Dogs folded and relocated to Orlando in time for the 1995 season. The move was announced in little fanfare in April, giving team organizers a little more than a month to assemble a roster, sell season tickets, and raise awareness for Orlando's newest pro franchise. Getting a late start also meant receiving the short end of booking dates at the Orlando Arena, resulting in the team having to start the season with 6 consecutive games on the road out of a 24-game schedule. A full quarter of the season went by before Orlando could see their roller gators, and by then they were 1-5. Only 1,400 fans were there to see the team's debut on June 26. Maybe Orlando was suffering a hangover from the NBA Finals, which concluded just 2 weeks earlier, with the Magic getting swept by the Houston Rockets. Maybe it was the rainy night that kept people home, or maybe it was just indifference and unawareness of the product. There may have been an oversaturation of sports that summer in Orlando, between the Arena League Predators, the Orlando Cubs baseball team, and even the Orlando Lions soccer team, and now roller hockey. The team struggled for most of the season to draw fans, finishing 17th in attendance out of the league's 19 teams, and finished 7-15 overall. Roller hockey returned to Orlando in 1996, but under new ownership and a new nickname. From the ashes of the Roller Gators, not to mention the threat of a lawsuit from the University of Florida over the use of the word Gators, the Jackals were born. Owned by real estate mogul Norton Herrick, who happened to own 25% of the league as well, the Jackals, unlike the Roller Gators, would have a substantial operating budget of $3.5 million. There would be new management, new coaches, and mostly new players. Before the season began, the Jackals sold nearly 3,000 season tickets, 2,000 of which were purchased by local businessman David Siegel. The home opener began on an ominous note, as high temperatures contributed to the ice below the sport court playing surface melting during the game, resulting in a 75-minute delay for the 6,200 fans who were in attendance. The Jackals overcame that embarrassing start, though, and were an unqualified success in the standings, skating to a league championship with a series win over Anaheim in a best-of-3 series which concluded at the Orlando Arena. The Jackals would follow up the season with more success in 1997, but in 2 years of ownership, Herrick sustained $4 million in losses. Though the team averaged 3,000 fans per game, roughly 1,000 were attending on complimentary tickets. So they really weren't making any money. The Jackals ceased operations and sold off their assets at the conclusion of the 1997 season, ending Orlando's 3-year experiment in roller hockey. I was at that game too. All right, the miracle. In 1996, the WNBA was created to serve as a counterpart to the NBA, giving a showcase to the best women's basketball players in the world. The league debuted in 1997 with 8 teams, expanding by 2 teams during each of the following 2 seasons. In April of '98, the league announced that it would expand again in 1999 with franchises in Minnesota and Orlando, mirroring the addition of the Minnesota Timberwolves and Orlando Magic to the NBA in 1989. No nickname was given at the initial announcement, though many speculated that the team could be called the Dazzle or the Illusion. As RDV Sports, they wanted to maintain some connection and natural tie with the Orlando Magic organization. In order to officially secure the franchise, however, the team needed to obtain at least 5,000 season ticket deposits by September 1st. The team faced a challenge of selling a familiar sport, basketball, to an almost entirely new audience, one geared more towards women and children and less towards the traditional corporate crowd. Some in the media even expressed skepticism that the league would attract local interest, with one columnist describing the WNBA as another example of Orlando's minor league status. With Magic Executive Vice President Pat Williams leading the charge to secure season ticket deposits, the team reached its goal by August when Disney, the real Disney, purchased 100 season tickets to put them over the top. By December, with a head coach and general manager already in place, the team announced that its name wouldn't be the Dazzle or Illusion, but the Miracle, with colors and logo closely mirroring those of its brother franchise, the Magic. Williams called Miracle the perfect nickname to capture and reflect what Central Florida is all about. One small catch. A baseball team in the Florida State League from Fort Myers already owned the trademark to the name Miracle, so RDV Sports had to negotiate with Fort Myers to gain use of the name as well. This was one of the reasons it took 8 months to announce the team's nickname. The Miracle debuted on June 10, 1999, with Governor Jeb Bush signing a proclamation declaring it Orlando Miracle Day in Florida. Though the team opened with a loss at home against the two-time defending champion Houston Comets, an announced crowd of 15,422 helped make for a spectacular debut. Despite an opening season record of 15-17, the Miracle only missed making the playoffs by virtue of losing a tiebreaker, having finished in a three-way tie for second place in the Eastern Conference. The Miracle improved by one game in 2000, finishing with a 16-16 record, but this time earned a berth in the playoffs, losing 2-1 in the first round to Cleveland. Success on the court, or at the very least being competitive, did not necessarily translate into high attendance for the Miracle. In their inaugural season, the team finished 6th in the league in attendance, averaging 9,800 fans per game. Over the next 3 seasons, however, the Miracle were near the bottom of attendance, hovering around 7,300 fans per game. Not terrible by any stretch, but not what RDV Sports had hoped for when adding the Miracle to their portfolio. On the court, after 4 seasons, the Miracle had 1 playoff appearance and an overall record of 60-68. This was hardly the stuff to energize a town and keep a fan base engaged. Then controversy swirled in the summer of 2002 when Pat Williams signed a letter opposing a proposal that would add sexual orientation to the City of Orlando's anti-discrimination ordinance. Disenchanted fans protested outside of a Miracle home game to voice their displeasure that not only had Williams mailed the letter in a company envelope, but at the seeming betrayal of a core part of the team's fan base. Just a few months later in October, citing financial difficulties and a need to focus on the Magic, RDV Sports ceased operation of the Miracle. The team moved to Connecticut and became the Suns, and in the last 20 years have been a perennial playoff team, winning 3 conference championships. So, these are some of the teams that I didn't get to. Have a look. There's a lot of football teams. The Rage, obviously from the XFL. The Tuskers came along in the United Football League. The Orlando Apollos of the Alliance of American Football, who Steve Spurrier declared as the league champions because the league folded before the season actually finished, and they were in first place. The Orlando Fantasy of the Lingerie Football League, which survived for 3 years. The Sun Dogs, the USISL. There was an indoor soccer team called the Sharks. We even tried lacrosse for a time in 2010. We had the Orlando Titans. The Aces were a minor league basketball team for the ABA. The Orlando Seals played 1 season during the time, there's our Seal fan back there, when the Solar Bears went away, the Seals came along and played in the Atlantic Coast Hockey League. The Orlando Stars were a slow pitch softball version of the Rebels. And if you look at the baseball teams, going back all the way to the late 1910s, you've got the Caps, Tigers, Bulldogs, Colts, Gulls, Senators, Seabees, Saratomas, Flyers, Dodgers, Cubs, Rays. My God, so many teams. And there's probably still some more I couldn't find. But that's the presentation. So I wanted to thank you, and I believe we do have some time for questions. If there are any, I'd be happy to field them.
Is there a serious effort being made to try to get the Tampa Bay Rays over here?
There's an effort being made. I don't know if it's serious or not, but it's something that, as I alluded to, Pat Williams has been trying to do since the 90s. And yeah, the name that he has in mind, the Dreamers, I think is fairly appropriate. I know some people don't like it, but I think it's apropos. Yeah, I don't think it'll happen, but Orlando hasn't had spring training since the early 90s and hasn't had a minor league baseball team since the late 1990s either. And I think that's one of the things that Major League Baseball looks for, is markets that have sustained interest and success supporting AAA baseball. And for whatever reason, we haven't tried to bring a AAA club to Orlando, which I think would be really successful, but they're looking at other markets like Nashville and Charlotte that have thriving downtown AAA teams. So I don't think that it'll happen, but you never know.
I have a question about the roller hockey teams.
Mm-hmm.
What's it, the Jackals?
Jackals.
When you said that they sold off all their assets, I thought, what assets did they sell?
They had the sport court surface, yeah, which was probably their most valuable asset of all. Jerseys, sticks, rollerblades, yeah. There wasn't much else, though. It was really the sport court, which was their most valuable.
Surface.
Oh, they played at the Orlando Arena. So they laid down the sport court surface on top of the...
Is that like the old Amway?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the original one, yep.
I remember going to an Orlando Lions game at Edgewater High School. Which version of the Orlando Lions would that have been? Do you know?
Do you remember the year?
No, 80s or 90s?
Okay.
90s.
It wouldn't be anything to do with FC. It would have...
Yeah.
Yeah, they probably hadn't turned professional just yet, but they didn't play their games in the Citrus Bowl. They played in some of the smaller high school stadiums.
Who did you say owned, 75% or 90%?
Of which team?
The Lions?
The Lions.
Something out of Tallahassee.
There was a company that owned 90% of the team that was based in Tallahassee.
Did it have to do with Colin Phipps?
I don't know that name. Sorry. I saw a question back here.
Do you have anything that shows the Orlando Rebels roster?
Yes.
Part or all of their period of play?
We have programs from the Rebels from the 60s and some into the 70s. And we have a scrapbook that Marge herself kept from the beginning, in 1954, all the way through about 1970 or 71. So if there are names you're looking for, I could try to help you find some.
Yeah, whatever. Do you have like photograph?
Yeah, we can talk about that after.
Okay.
Sure. I should also mention, as you came in, there's an exhibit on the first floor that features artifacts from some of the teams that we've talked about and some that aren't featured in this. So if you didn't get a chance to check it out on your way in, please do before you leave.
I just want to make a quick comment. I find it interesting, him bringing up the Rebels softball thing. I find it interesting that in the state of Florida, it took so long, even at the high school level, for softball to become, a sanctioned sport for female athletes, and then for us to have, a league or an adult pro team here in Orlando at that time. That's surprising to me, I think.
It was really something interesting. I discovered that Varner Stadium was the first dedicated softball facility that was constructed in all of Florida. and this was the 1930s. So
What were the years of them again?
for the Rebels, from 54 to 85.
Where did you say that stadium was?
On Livingston, I believe, just past Bob Carr,
Oh.
in the Exposition Fairgrounds. Yeah, I bet you're right.
It is right.
Everything was ahead of its time, and they received tremendous fan support. They couldn't make any money, and that was really the downfall.
And also, you can probably count on one hand the number of championships won by all these teams, because even when you look at the football teams that have come and gone through Orlando, I think it's the arena team that's won twice. I think they've lost 4 or 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone else, even when they've gotten to the championship game, could never, we just could never, despite what Steve Spurrier said, we could never bring home the championship. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In an official way for some reason.
Yeah, there are a couple of championships that Orlando can claim, and even some teams that have multiple championships. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot that never got there, and some that just got that 1 or 2.
I think one thing that's against us too is most of the folks here in Orlando, I'm speaking out of turn perhaps, are not natural born Orlandoans. They're people from this, that, and the other around the rest of the United States. They bring that team with them as far as loyalty.
It's true, and this is a transient state, and new people are coming in all the time, or transplant state, not transient. We're also sports teams are competing with Disney World and Universal and the beaches and everything else. So it's hard. It's hard for the Magic, as an NBA team, to consistently draw fans, much less teams that don't have nearly the resources that they do. So there's a lot of theories, a lot of speculation at why teams don't work and come and go. And I wasn't able to reach a solid conclusion, but it's a lot of different things, I would say, as opposed to one thing.
Well, we got to give credit to Pat Williams for all his efforts.
Yes, very much.
One more question
Sure.
about the Orlando Rebels there. During that entire span that they were a team, you said 1954 through 1985? Okay, was that fast pitch
Fast pitch,
through that entire span?
yes. Yeah. Yeah, they're very.
So I hear that they're building a Major League Baseball arena down by SeaWorld.
Well, that's Pat Williams' idea.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be constructed near SeaWorld. Yeah.
That's a tough sell.
Yeah.
Especially when you aren't directly having conversations with the Rays to say, hey, come on over here. It seems like a power move that's taking place. Like, hey, the Rays should come over here, as opposed to working with them to make it happen. I guess. I mean, there's a big difference between that.
Yeah.
So,
They're the dreamers.
Yeah.
It seems almost like, speaking as one of the transients here, I used to work at a AAA stadium back home. I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Back there, I worked for both we had the Phillies organization and the Yankees, because we're right in between both cities. And even then, we were drawing 70,000, which is great. We needed that to maintain. It still wasn't the best in the league by any stretch of the imagination. We're still, a very successful team now. But I'm thinking if they even build that down by SeaWorld, they're just hoping to do kind of what the Vegas Raiders are doing, where they're just trying to get, and now the A's moving over to Vegas, trying to get tourists to be like, well, we're here in the town, we might as well go there. I mean, why would you build a stadium of all places in Orlando down by SeaWorld and Universal or anything, unless you're trying to pull those people, because no one from here is going to go down there usually.
Right.
Unless they're diehard fans.
Yeah, that's sort of what I think. There just isn't and it's not on a mass transit line either that people can use. So a lot of problems with the idea.
I mean, it's a great effort. It's just, it's going to take a lot. And now that the Rays are getting permission to look in St. Pete anywhere they want, which I think they did because of the move by St. Williams.
Yeah,
St. Pete finally spoke and was like, no, you can pick wherever you want. We'll find somewhere that'll work now.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks again for supporting us.